Okay, it's like we'll get started here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this segment of Pirate University on virtual fundraising tools. My name is Ryan Finch, Creative Technology Director here at Corporate AV, and I'm joined by our friend and partner, Nick McElhaney with Mac Tech Solutions. Welcome, Nick, and thank you for joining us.
Hey, Ryan, great to be here.
So, well, for a little background for our audience here, obviously the events industry at large went through quite a down year, I think it's fair to say, so to speak. So, but that looked very different for different types of organizations. As we've discussed during this, these last couple of days on the corporate side, for the most part, early on, they were really able to just kind of hold off for at least a significant portion of 2020, with some exceptions, of course, handling some things internally on Zoom or more or less biding time. However, our friends and clients in the nonprofit space were obviously not able to do that. Many had sold tickets already to March 2020 galas, needed to come up with something. And of course, that continued up until really where we are right now. And ultimately, it looks like where we're heading for fall of 2021, needing to be able to raise funds in a virtual setting, engage sponsors, engage donors, and really remain very much a part of their local communities. So to help with that, some of you may know our team, along with Mac Tech Solutions and Hospitality Resource Group, HRG, got together with some other groups and we put together this virtual platform. And flash forward a year and a half, it's been really quite successful for a number of different nonprofits, both locally and nationally. So, of course, in the virtual space, we need a pretty solid amount of help from technology and really our technology partners. And so that's really what we wanted to get into here today. And I do have a few slides to show you here to get this kind of kicked off. So here they come. All right. There we go. Nick, you seeing that?
Yeah, I'm seeing it.
Okay, so far so good. All right, Nick. So why don't we take them through what we're going to be talking about here today, and tell us about some fundraisers in general.
Okay. So in the fundraising world, most fundraisers have a lot in common. Pretty much it starts off with some sort of inspiration. So a compelling story, an impact video, in an in-person event, someone standing up at the podium and speaking a heartfelt story, all of that, just to try and, pull at the heartstrings of the donors, of the people involved, all of that. So that is like the majority of fundraisers you go to, that is always there in one form or another. And then after that, it gets on to the donors. They're there for a reason. Some donors very few, but some do not like having any kind of recognition. But the majority of them like to be included. They want to be included with their peers. They want people to know they're donating. They want people to, give them some kind of accolades or something like that. They want recognition. They want their name in lights somewhere. They want their company's logo somewhere. They want to be able to say to the people, their employees, that, hey, we gave X amount of dollars to this great organization. Look how great we are. So that's really something you have to think about in a virtual event, a hybrid event. Like, how do you get that across? How do you show that in real time?
Well, I think it's absolutely right. And I think the key here is, and this goes back to some other content that we had in this program the last couple of days, is that really the approach starts with identifying at the very beginning the event goals. And so some of this may seem relatively obvious for anyone who's been in the fundraising space, but we're starting with what it is that you're trying to do from a top level, and then trying to get the technology to support that versus using the technology to tell us what to do. And I think that's kind of what you'll get from this. Nick, I'm sorry, I sort of cut you off there? Is there?
No, that was perfect. Exactly the way I was thinking. And then, the last thing that I want to touch on, I mean, Ryan, you've been to many of these events in person. How many times do people want to out donate someone else, during the funding portion or something like that. There's competition there, right?
Right. Well, and exactly. No, there's momentum and there are social dynamics, and and a lot of those don't replicate exactly, but we're drawing from these kind of core elements of fundraising to to come up with something to recreate that in a virtual setting. So Nick, you're totally right. I have seen a lot of that. Some of that might be a little ego driven, but we won't get into that. And we'll certainly get into the finer points of what we're touching on here. Go ahead, Nick.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that we have to somehow try and translate that to the virtual space. Translate all those things. And not everything translates perfectly, but we do have tools to make what people are used to at an in-person event translate to virtual.
Right. One other thing I'd also point out is there are also sponsors and often honorees and special guests and MCs and brand videos. So even the program, obviously for us on the production side, that is a focus for us. Even the program has a lot of similarities. So again, that's really our starting point here.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, how is it that we do this virtually?
So we do this virtually. So we sat down and we thought about, like, what does an in-person event have? First thing is, every in-person event has some sort of venue. Okay. Right. So how do you translate that to the internet? How do you translate that online? We created an event website platform that can be customized, because every in-person event is different. Okay, and they all have different aspects. So the cookie cutter approach doesn't always work, especially when certain organizations like to wow the people that are coming, wow their donors. So an event website is a good replacement for the venue. Okay, from there, what happens during events? So a lot of times there's people speaking at the podium. That's easy to translate. We can stream that, no big deal. But also, there's some sort of fund need, usually at in-person events, and usually that's sometimes paddle raises, things like that. How do you translate that online? So a text to give, and in this slide you could see there's an auctioneer there with text heart song to a number, and that allows you to give money. Okay, so the text to give allows you to replace the paddle raise. And then like the auctioneer there, like during the paddle race, a lot of times people have auctioneers and they're egging people on, asking for more money, giving people recognition during the event, stuff like that. So that's a great tool if you want to still include an auctioneer if you did it in in an in-person event. And then the meter. We call this scene a meter scene on an in-person event. On a virtual event. And as you can see across the top, there's names that scroll, there's a dollar amount, there's a progress bar, stuff like that shows progress of the fund need, shows progress of the fundraising. And this allows us to give people recognition, show some status, things like that. It just makes it a little bit more fun. And when people donate, within seconds, their name comes up on the screen with a thank you. Just like the auctioneer would in an in-person event, somebody would raise their paddle and they would say, "Thank you, Jim Smith."
Right.
So it's the same idea. And if you have a good auctioneer, they'll be able to, they'll actually thank the person also.
That's right. Well, not all things are created equal. That's for sure. So I do want to point out that this part really is more of an overview, and Nick, I think we should really get into more of the we'll call it gritty detail on each of these kind of facets of a virtual event that we pointed out, and then we'll kind of double back with some things to watch out for, and also how it applies to a hybrid event. So starting with really one of the most important parts, because it's often the thing that your audience sees first. Let's start with this event website. Now, personally, I feel strongly about this, and this is something we've had a lot of discussion on, that it's a way to ground your event, right? It very much just like the venue. So Nick, go ahead, take it away.
So when we started doing this. What ended up happening is, you can stream anywhere. You can stream to Facebook, you can stream to YouTube and all that. And we found that when you're doing things like that, the audience is all over the place. They don't know what to do. They don't have a centralized location. So we created an event website platform, okay? And they're custom to the organization and things like that. So there's a place to stream. There's a place to accept donations. If you have an online auction, there's a place for that. There's a place to list your sponsors. There's a place to list your honorees, your MC. Have a chat that everybody can participate in, not only the people on YouTube seeing the YouTube chat, not only the people on Facebook seeing the Facebook chat, so everything's in one centralized location. I mean, sometimes you go to an event that's streamed all over the place, you're on Facebook, you see 8 people, but on YouTube there's 1,000, and you're sitting there going, this event must not be so great because there's only 8 people here, so having everybody in one place, you get your full, you get your full viewer count, everybody gets to chat together, things like that. And it gives you a really great tool. That tool also doesn't only have to be used during the event. It can be used for promotion leading up to the event. So in an in-person event, a lot of times, there are sponsorships and things like that, but a good amount of money is raised night of. In a virtual event, a lot of times that flips a little bit. The vast majority is raised before, and then the money night of is kind of like the icing on the cake. So using the website to highlight your honorees, highlight your sponsors, things like that, and have reasons to send out emails and say, hey, we're honoring Ryan Finch, okay, for this great award. Come here and check out what he's all about. It's just a reason for them to come. Of course, there's donate buttons on the site and things like that, and ways to give, and some, calls to action, some tear jerkers, things like that, to not only highlight Ryan Finch, but also bring in a little bit more money leading up to the event.
Yeah. And so this is actually one thing I want to comment on here. So because again, from an outside perspective, one of the major differences, right, or one of the key distinctions between, say, a virtual event versus a fundraising campaign is very much this website. That is a very blurry line when it comes to kind of what Nick's describing, is like, yeah, we do raise a lot of the money leading up to the event. And that is not unlike having a fundraising campaign, which by itself already exists, but it culminates in this thing that happens at a certain time and a certain date, where we're recreating a lot of those elements in in-person fundraiser. So without that site, without that unique own place, it just very much feels like you're just asking for money, which again is not a problem per se, but it's not quite the same thing. And I think that was one thing, that I thought was worth pointing out. And Nick, as far as, things that we've heard from clients, how many times have you heard, well, I have a website?
Yeah.
And what do you say to that?
So we hear that all the time. Well, we have a website. Why can't we host it there? You can. If you have a good web person that's managing your site and they're confident in doing this, great. But what we find is, first things first, websites, a lot of times, for nonprofits, things like that, they're not hosted on really big servers, things like that. So what ends up happening is when you're having an event at 7 p.m. and everybody shows up from 6:58 to 7 o'clock, their server doesn't know what to do with hundreds of people showing up at once. Okay, where an event platform, be it ours or any other ones like that provide a service like this, their servers are designed to take that load, that instant load of that many people showing up. That's number one. Number two, our websites, and it's recommended to make it kind of like a pit. You get there and you have nothing to do on that site but interact with the event. There's no, if you do it on your website, there's your menu across the top that's always there. They can click and go do something else and then get sidetracked, things like that. This website is just for your event. So that's really positive like, and I mean, of course, if you have a really good web person, they'll know how they could possibly modify the wrapper of your website to do that. That's fine. But it's highly recommended that once somebody comes to that website, there's no way for them to leave other than to give money and watch the event and then click close at the end.
Right.
So that's the whole purpose behind this.
Right. It's, do you have support to do that on your own site? Do you have the capacity to do that on your own site? And will you create an environment that gives you a more or less captive audience? That pit. I've never heard you use that term. I'm going to be honest with you. We've been on, I would say, hundreds of exploratory calls and kickoff calls and project management calls. I've never heard you call it a pit. So I'm going to file that one
away. This
may
have been the first time. It's
like a Venus flytrap. It's softer.
But in a way, it kind of is. Like, it's just like your venue when in person. You bring everybody to one place, and all they can do is that.
That actually by itself is a key point. We had a lot of discussions early on where the question was, all right, we'll have them show up here, and then they'll go here, and then they'll go here, and then to donate, there's another site. That became so unmanageable so fast. And one of the first things we did was, that is going to confuse everyone. You have to, it's like herding cats, right? Like you have to give them a very clear path to follow, because there is no, contextual information. Like when you're in the room, when you walk in a ballroom, you walk in and, okay, the tables are here, the bar is over there. I might look at that one first. The bar is over there, the tables are here, and the stage is up there. You know exactly what's going to happen, where you need to go. You probably have an idea where the restroom is. In a virtual setting, all of those things are disjointed, or could potentially be disjointed. So if your networking is over here and your pre-function is over there and your event is happening over here and your donations over here, you have created a very non-seamless experience. And what we found ultimately is that is a losing scenario. Yeah. So, Nick, would you say that's fair to categorize?
Yeah, that is exactly. And in an in-person event, you kind of follow the people in. There's no one to follow in a virtual event. You're sitting there by yourself. So you don't really kind of know where you're going. I mean, even during this Pirate U on Hopin, you and Joe were just standing up there on today's opening saying, now click over here to do this and go down. Like, so there's a lot of instruction. So in a nonprofit event, we try to make it so there's no place to go with it.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and that I think kind of leads into this next point here, is from a branding perspective, because, I think one thing that a lot of planners already had experience with was, coming up with an event theme, right? Yeah. And we had some that were like, it's going to be the Roaring 20s theme. And then that quickly got, squashed because it wasn't very roaring. But, tell me about how is the branding of the event site? How does that get involved here?
So what we do is, like you said, a lot of development directors, executive directors, planners are used to coming up with invitations, used to coming up with a theme. Okay. So what we do is we take those invitations, take that style, take everything, and we translate it to the web. So when people get an invitation, be it by email, USPS, they get it, they see it. When they go online, they see it, the branding almost exactly the same. So it's like, okay, so this organization put time and effort into a seamless experience, okay, which makes it better than, oh, well, we're going to just send them to, a page that just is our normal website or things like that. That has no wow, has nothing special.
Another page on their sitemap. Yeah. And it's just like, oh, ways to give. That isn't memorable the same way that this is. And I think that's kind of a key takeaway here, is that you're creating something that's memorable. I mean, Nick, we just talked about what it's like being in person, right? You can remember what the room looked like, what it felt like, what the theme, what the atmosphere was like. If you don't create something unique, there will be very little to, kind of tie to that memory of that particular year. It doesn't create anything for you, emotionally speaking.
Yeah. And moving on, you touched on something, donations. So the goal of this is to accept donations. And when you're in an in-person atmosphere, I mean, you can accept donations in so many ways. But online, a lot of people would like resort, oh, we'll only accept credit cards for donations. Okay,
Right.
well, that's great. That's instant gratification. Somebody wants to give you money, you process it, it's done. But what happens to your bigger donors that want to give that night? Because that's what they're used to doing and they want the recognition that night. Are they going to give you $25,000 on a credit card? Probably not. I mean, I've
Not
seen
without
some
paying
come
credit
through
card
like
fees.
that, but the vast majority of them don't. So how do they give? Donor advised funds, or
Yeah.
mailing a check, or some of them do stock transfers. So on an event website, taking credit card only limits you. So you can also take pledges in things that aren't credit cards. And these bigger donors that are giving that kind of money, most of them are known anyway. They're part of the nonprofit circle, and they come through on their pledge. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It also helps that if you have a live meter and things like that, and an auctioneer, they thank that person. So it's like, we actually like called you out that you gave us this money, so you have to come through on your pledge. So it's really smart to have multiple avenues. Have somebody put in all their information and choose credit card. And most of the donations through credit card are like 10,000 below. And then on the higher amounts, there'll be donor advised funds, mailing a check, stock transfer, and it really makes it possible for the people that are used to giving night of, it makes it possible for them to do so.
Right. Now, one thing I want to point out, because, again, relating this back to an in-person experience, specifically on the fundraising side, I mean, making pledges, right? Making pledges by itself is one thing. And then, you count up how much you made. And then somehow in between the making the pledge and the checkout, something got lost in translation and maybe you didn't collect all that. Whereas in this space, we actually have the analytics behind who gave what, who pledged what. So it's not very loose at that point. It's loose in terms of flexibility, especially for the aging, demographics, who oftentimes are, your large individual donors. They may not be as well versed in these tools, and you're giving them ways to get that recognition that Nick mentioned earlier, to be seen, to be part of the program and the cause. And you're giving them multiple ways to do it. And I think that is actually one of the more important aspects of something custom, versus what we're going to talk about in a minute, which is what ultimately are also available in DIY solutions, right? Like with DIY solutions, whether it's a GiveSmart or there are a ton of different platforms that now give you kind of a custom landing page. You may not get options like that. You may get credit card, and that is it. And if your donor didn't want to give that way, you may not have a way to get them the same level of recognition as, say, Ryan Finch, who sent $10 in. And does that create the kind of effect that you want it to have, right? So,
and
I thought that was a good point, Nick.
People who are used to the in-person event, the development directors, the executive directors, I mean, anybody involved in them knows that there are plants in the room. There are people who raise their hand at a certain number. They already knew they were giving that money, but they don't want to give it beforehand. They want to do it. And a lot of times those are the older people, like you said.
Right.
And the challenge with that is they are afraid of technology. So you can say to the older donor that wants to give night of, okay, we will put you in the system at a certain time and you'll get your recognition. Okay.
And that gets back to that.
They are so happy to give their 10, 15, 20, $50,000 and get their recognition and not have to do anything, just have to watch.
Right.
Because they're afraid of the technology. Now, there are plenty of platforms that will allow you to do that.
Right.
And it's a really good tool because that's also what development directors and executive directors are used to doing. Mm-hmm. So it translates well and it triggers them to be more comfortable with virtual events.
Absolutely. That gets back to a point you made earlier with the momentum and the trying to one up each other.
Yeah.
You can't ask a person who may not have that aptitude with modern technology to trigger their donation at exactly the right time. If they don't have that, skill set, if they don't have that familiarity, you've eliminated that off the table. So again, another way that we're connecting the in-person experience and some of those social dynamics into this virtual experience. But Nick, one thing we breezed over that I don't think is fair that comes with, say a website is the analytical side. Tell me about what kind of information we can get.
So, according to the type of event, a lot of times at nonprofit events, we only give a single link so that the people that have trouble getting in won't have trouble getting in. The less technical adept people will just have to click a link and come. So you don't have to put in a username, a password, all of that. So when you have something that's like that, you end up with a lot of data, but it's all anonymous. Okay, but we can see where they're coming from, how long they stayed, how many people came, the ways they interacted with the website, to try and get an idea of what worked, what didn't, things like that. It also, in these analytics, we see things like, on events that everybody would be coming from, let's say going to an event in New York, we see people from Iowa, California, Canada, like just people that might be family members of people involved and things like that couldn't come before but can now. And what we found from a lot of organizations is they're getting a lot more out of state donations because people came and people wanted to contribute, and they're bumping up their donor list, which is a big deal for organizations and nonprofits to have more donors on their donor list, because when they reach out, they can bring in more funds in the future. So even if they only got a little donation, they can keep in touch with those people and they have them involved in the organization now. So the analytics really help there. Now, if it is a unique login event, we can track everything down to Bill Smith came at this time, he looked at these things, he gave this much money, and we can track all of that, of course. But a lot of times the simplicity of just everybody having a single link just to come outweighs that little bit of knowing what Bill Smith actually did. A lot of times, even with talking with people who are on their second event and want to work with us, their first event, we had so much trouble because people couldn't log in, or one of our key stakeholders lost their password and it took them 10 minutes to reset their password and get in. And it's like, did they really need to do that? Because especially in a fundraiser, since online, it doesn't matter if you have 100 or 150 people, let's say, because the server bandwidth is similar. Who cares if a couple extra stragglers come in, because they might give you some money. So if you have a few, if everybody buys tickets and there's a few extras in there, it doesn't really matter, because you're getting your word out and they might give you some extra money.
Absolutely. Well, and it's another way to extract more value out of the investments that you make into these fundraisers. And obviously venues tend to be one of the bigger costs in the in-person space. So, it's only right that you should try to get every ounce of value out of it that you can. And the analytics side is just, it's such a wealth of actionable insight post-event. So Nick, tell me about sponsor recognition.
Okay. So sponsor recognition, everybody wants to be recognized. So throughout a virtual event, they can be recognized in two places, on the website and in the live stream. Okay. So on the website, of course, we can have the sponsor logos there. We can have if they're a high level sponsor, if they want a special sponsor profile, we can do that too. That could be done on an organization's website or pretty much anywhere, as long as the person doing it knows how, so giving logos, giving, a little bit of extra for the high level sponsors, great. The majority of events have a countdown clock at the beginning. During that, a slideshow with sponsors on it is a great way to give recognition. Majority of events have some sort of overlay. Okay, so the overlay frame that's there, if it's a high level sponsor, their logo can go there. Of course, anybody during the event can thank the sponsor verbally. Also, if the sponsor wants to set a special spot where one of their, the CEO or one of their philanthropy division, the head of their philanthropy division wants to speak on a high level sponsor, they can say, thank you, blah, blah, blah organization for having us. You're a really great cause, blah, 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 blah. And they can speak during the event. It could be a 30-second snippet, but sometimes it just makes the sponsor really happy, because a lot of these sponsors like sending out the videos to their people just to show that they're giving back to the community, showing that there's some, that they're giving some money to causes, things like that. So it's really great to have a tool like that. And so the sponsor can use it two ways. They get their recognition from the world, and they also get their recognition from their employees when they're corporations.
Right. Well, and this kind of leads into, we'll talk about this, and we'll double back to registration, but online tables, that is a new development over the last few months or so. And also, I think kind of a unique sponsorship opportunity to sponsor your own table. So, Nick, do you want to talk to that?
So, the nonprofit organizations, when we first started working with them on this, their biggest challenge was when they're selling sponsorships, how do they translate the value? So during selling sponsorships, they always gave, some sort of recognition, but they also gave tables. Okay, so they said, how do we do this? How do we give the sponsor something special over everyone else? Okay, how do they buy themselves a table? So we developed the ability to have a full HD live stream, a live chat for the whole event, okay, and then private tables below it up to 10 people, just like you would be in an in-person event. You usually have 10, 12 people. That would allows them to invite the people from their organization in, and they can have a little bit of community while they watch the event, so they can discuss it. They can get there a half hour early, hang out. The event starts, and they can have make a night of it in a way, and be with their friends during a difficult time when it's hard to get together.
Right. And it gets back to that social element again, trying to recreate as much of the key aspects of these in-person experiences in the virtual setting. And honestly, I think online tables really goes a long way with creating that kind of I'm watching an event with people at my table. And I wish we had an example prepared, but I personally was doing some tech support, support being one of those key things to make sure we have on an event site or any sort of virtual event. But I personally went into one of them because somebody had messaged the host saying hey, we're having trouble with somebody's mute button. And by the time I got in, they had already figured it out, and they're all just throwing their heads back in laughter, and they're like, "Hey, what's up? Welcome!" You could tell that they were having a good time with it. And whereas we've seen people try to recreate that with a 2-platform solution, hey, we're going to open up Zoom, and then I'm going to share my screen, and then we're going to watch the video. And I mean, if you've ever been a part of something like that, it probably wasn't a very good experience. Not to say there aren't ways to make it work. You might have had a good experience, but by and large, we found that to be really disappointing. You're also now inviting the possibility of, all right, you're sending somebody to another place. They aren't able to hit the donate button on the screen in front of them. They're watching, and then maybe they get tied up in conversation and somebody's unmuted. And so, it's one of those things that if it's not controlled and managed and seamless, it gets in the way of what you're trying to do. And I got to say, personally, Nick, I found the online tables, it seemed like everyone had a really good experience.
Yeah, so, I agree. It really is. It really is a great technology.
Tell me about, if you don't mind, registration. I'm a personal big believer that you really need to have some sort of registration system, even if it's a free event. Not just for the lead capture, not for your donor management, but it's so easy to miss something like this. It's so easy to oh yeah, I'll go to that, and then never put it in your calendar and never log it anywhere that you're going to remember that later. You have to create some level of commitment, and that's something that we see is when groups don't have the kind of attendance that they wanted to see in the virtual setting. A lot of the time it's because they didn't ask them to register ahead of time. They didn't create any sort of commitment level. So I'm a huge believer of having a registration no matter what when it comes to a virtual event in particular. So Nick, what kinds of registration features, tools have you kind of been exposed to?
So registration is important, just for all the reasons you said. And also, when we started speaking to organizations about this, they're switching to virtual. They're like, we're not giving anybody dinner. We're not what are they paying for? So they didn't want to actually make people pay. So a lot of times what they would do is the event is free, and then when you choose how many people you want, it would pop up and say, you know, this event is free, but we are suggesting a donation of $100, $150, $200 per person for the event. And that was a big moneymaker for them because they felt like anybody can come. But if somebody was used to giving the money to get to the event, they would give it anyway. And that was very true. And a lot of times we told the people, well, how much would you have made at this event after you paid for the food and everything at the venue? And they would say, they would give us the money, and we'd say, so charge about that. You know, that way you're not charging for the food, you're not charging for all of this, you know, and makes people feel like, okay, so it would have been $250 in person, it is $175 for virtual. Okay, and they felt like, okay, so they're not just like, you know, taking advantage of me with a suggested donation. So there's that ability. There's the ability to take all the sponsorships, like and tickets and everything in one place. Yes, like you said, somebody actually registers, they've committed. Now, of course, if they didn't give out any money, they still won't show up, but you have the ability to know that they wanted to come, so you can send them emails. The email that they get as a confirmation can have an add to calendar link in it, so they can click the button, add it to their calendar. That way it pops up so they don't forget. And, you know, a lot of these organizations have gotten used to sending 3 or 4 emails within the day of the event. So it's like, hey, tomorrow the event's coming up. You know, then the next morning, hey, the event's tonight. The afternoon, hey, the event is, you know, in 3 hours, and right before the event starting in 20 minutes. You know, just to keep people used to seeing it and keep people ready and on the hook to actually come to it.
Right.
So registration is really important on that.
Absolutely. So, Nick, we've talked, you know, a pretty good amount, obviously, about the website itself, and I think that really speaks to how important that element is, because to me, it's often overlooked. You know, is that destination, more or less? You know, where is your event taking place? I know it's virtual, but where is it taking place? I think it's often overlooked, and I think the level of detail that you know, goes into it offers a lot of advantages to, again, getting back to our goals, recreating a lot of those, you know, kind of in-person based experiences. But let's move on now to, you know, the more fundraising aspects of the, you know, the virtual fundraisers, you know, and that would be things like Fund a Need and how they integrate with the live stream. So obviously this is some things that, you know, I can kind of talk a little bit as well, but I'm curious to know, you know, kind of what your jump off point here is.
So from the beginning, I've been saying recognition, and ease of donation. So number one is when people donate and their name pops up on the screen, they're happy. Okay, they got their recognition. Okay, so we have I mean, Give Smart has them, One Cause has them, some sort of meter that shows up. Okay, I know, Ryan, you've brought them in to events and stuff like that, and you know, they function very well. You know, the scrolling names work with some of them. I'm pretty sure One Cause has a nice little scrolling name thing. You know, so having something like that so people can get their recognition is great. So during the Fund a Need in person, people are getting their recognition when they're raising their hand. They're getting their thank yous. But on a virtual event, people could give money and nobody would ever know. Okay, until possibly after, if the organization wanted to publish their donors. So having something that's live and streaming in the live stream is a really great way for people to get their recognition. Now, that being said, there's also the multiple avenues to donate, so people can give using their phone with a text to give, or right below on that event website have a donate button. If they push it, it drops down. They can put in their information and donate, things like that. So having all of those tools really helps you. And then on top of that, you know, if you're doing something that you're streaming with a live person and it's not fully pre-recorded, to have a live auctioneer asking for money, calling out people who donated, saying, hey, we're almost there. Our goal is 225,000. We're at 212. We only have whatever, 18,000 more to go. Things like that. Did I do that math right? No. But things like that really, really help. You know, just like in the room, an in-person event, if there was no auctioneer asking for the money, less people would give. So having things like that really, really work for the fund and need. It really translates well from the in-person to the virtual, and really
Absolutely.
gets people used to it. People that are used to it actually really appreciate it.
Yeah. And I got to say, in terms of creating the excitement, the thing that you want to show up for, the event experience, obviously the live stream really does create that. Like, we have the venue and then we have the program. And so those two being the two kind of sides of the coin, the venue being the website and the program being the live stream. If we think about what we create, what we drive from that experience, Nick, you're spot on with people liking to see their names and liking to feel like they're connected with the program. I mean, here's a point. This video lives on, right? This video is going to be hosted somewhere, whether it's embedded on their website or here's a clip of last year's gala, and you're going to reuse this content in promotional material and whatnot. And honestly, that's a whole nother conversation. But just for the fact that your donor is now in that video, and anytime they go back, their name is in that video and they feel tied to the cause, they feel like they're being recognized, Nick, your point earlier. But that's also creating another reason to show up for the live event, right? When you're watching the replay, and we know it's a very, convenience oriented setting, the virtual setting, people, I'll watch it later, I'll watch it later. But when they go in and they watch that and they see, oh, I know Elizabeth Pash, and they say, wow, like I now feel connected to that. I'm represented in the cause. So that to me really is important for creating that kind of, pull for a donor. Even like smaller donors who maybe have never donated before, they say, well, shoot, this is pretty cool, and we've actually seen people just give a small amount just to get involved. And even after the program's ended, we'll leave it up for a few minutes. We got the music playing. It's thank you. Here's our sponsors again. And we'll see actually, a few more names show up. And I'm telling you, like, I can see the person sitting there in their room going, well, let's see if this thing works, and send a text message and donate. And there they go. They're in the broadcast. So
Actually,
I do
to
think
speak on that, this event right here that for HeartShare,
right.
we left the meter up because we saw donations coming through. I had Joe from your team. He was asking me to take it down. I said, no, there's a few people on a donation page. And like a minute before he took it down, they hit goal. Right. Like right at the end.
Right.
Like they were so close and they finally hit goal. They were hundreds of dollars off and they hit goal right at the end of their event. And it was great. They were really happy that they actually hit goal in their first virtual event.
Well, and look, we were excited backstage. Yeah. We were like, we did it, because we felt like we were part of it at that point. We really were. But, I think that really does kind of illustrate the point of creating that excitement. As Nick mentioned earlier, right, you very realistically will not raise the total, or the majority of your funds that night. Mm-hmm. So we have to give people a reason to show up and to continue to donate. And if you squeeze out that last, that last stretch, that last 80-90%, that's significant, right? And it's significant and it creates a memorable experience. And I think honestly, that's what a lot of people are after in this space. But, mm-hmm. Some of the other things I wanted to point out in terms of tools, in terms of, different options and how we create these experiences. You mentioned multiple avenues to donate. Obviously, text to give being, the most prominent one. It's a very common, text this to 855 blah 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 blah. That's very common. However, I'll say that again, older demographics, maybe that still doesn't, move the needle for them. Maybe they would rather make a pledge. And then their name still shows up. They still feel like they've committed to it. I've also seen QR codes. Talking about making a comeback in terms of technology. QR codes, I feel like were totally irrelevant for like so long. And then all of a sudden now there's all these applications, whether it was like, hands-free menus at restaurants. And then, we had an event where the client already had an existing donation platform, but they didn't want to, not have all the advantages that we just kind of described earlier about having a custom site. They said, well, how do we connect the two? And Nick, I don't know if you want to speak to that, but we put that QR code in the broadcast and said, take out your phone, the QR, and we had a live auctioneer and he was like, the QR code is right over here. Scan this and make your donation. And talk about a way to, adapt to the digital environment. You have to give people options, and you have to make it easy. Make it easy to donate. Eliminate those barriers between, the funds in your account and the donation, the actual donations themselves, right, Nick? So, was there? Could you describe how that process went?
Well, yeah, so like you said with the QR code, that's something that's a comeback, and it, for people that are more technically minded, that's great. But you give my mother a QR code and you're not getting anywhere. Okay, like I went out to a restaurant with her recently, and she's like, "Wait, they don't give you menus?" Okay, I was like, "No, hold your phone." It was so for the people that aren't as technically minded, right below, and you'll see in some events that we've done, the auctioneer will be going right here.
Yeah.
There's a button. Click that button. There'll be a drop down. Put in your name, your donation amount, your email address, and the credit card number, and you can donate. Or choose mail in a check, and you can pledge. That's simple. Where he's giving instructions, he or she, that it's right there. A lot of times in our world, the biggest challenge is we see things as very easy. Texting something to a phone number or scanning your QR code, that's second nature to a lot of us. But the donors who are 70, 80, 90 years old, a lot of the big donors are. Okay, they want to be included, but they're afraid and they don't know what to do. So we have to keep telling ourselves over and over again, make it as easy as possible.
Absolutely.
So
one other thing that we kind of pointed to is that live auctioneer and the possibility of having a live auctioneer. Obviously, and again, this really kind of falls into the actual production side, or the program production side, in that live stream. Obviously, we've talked at length about the value of having pre-recorded content, and that being able to get things in, multiple takes instead of all at once, and different comfort levels and technology obstacles. It really is such a value. We talk about technology. Well, back it up a step. Having actual people, I wouldn't call them entertainers, but they are entertaining. Those professionals that get up there and in a live setting can create buzz. It is I can tell you from experience, it's such a cold environment talking to a screen without that kind of live audience feedback to feed off of. And we've heard a lot of people just not be able to make that jump, but I do want to give that its time of day, because we've had some really, really positive experiences with a live auctioneer who just excelled in this environment. Pat Tully is one of the names that comes to mind. We worked a lot with him. Talk about giving your program some character and some life. Pre-recordings can honestly have a tendency to feel a little overly scripted at times. Having something that's a little more off the cuff and that feels somewhat raw, I can tell you firsthand, that is something to seriously consider if you can. And there are some groups that they'll say, okay, we have somebody who can do that themselves, and that is all well and good. And for people who can actually speak in a virtual environment, I say more power to you. But if you have the choice between someone who may not be very comfortable and getting a professional, I highly, highly, highly recommend find that professional who excels in that setting, and you'll get that extra momentum. We had them calling out names, and we had a couple of moments where it was like hitting their goal, and you could see like this person was just like, overjoyed with it, and, had really become invested into the program. So I couldn't talk that up enough. Nick, is there anything in terms of the fund and need that you want to cover? I know we got about 10 minutes left, so I want to move on to some of the technical aspects, which are a little more detail oriented. But is there anything else on here that you wanted to touch on before we move?
I think we're good. I think we should move on to the technical.
Okay, well, what a very straightforward answer. Thank you very much. Here we go. Technical aspects. I know it's getting cut off a little bit at the bottom there, but you get the idea. So tell me about, this is something we heard a lot, right? You text to give. So I text, what do I text? Can you explain? And again, there's a generational thing here for sure. There's an aptitude thing for sure from a technology perspective. Can you walk the audience through what this text to give process is like? Like, what happens?
So let's take we can go many years back. So before smartphones,
we only have 10 minutes, Nick. Come on.
Yeah, before smartphones, it used to be you picked up your phone, you texted it, and returned, and you had an interaction with this robot that allowed you to give money. Okay, that is a thing of the past at this point because that interaction is extremely slow. So pretty much what we use now is just an auto reply. Someone texts give to a phone number, let's just say, and it says, thank you for your support. Please tap this link to donate. So they tap the link, they go to a web page on their smartphone, and they put in their information. It's that simple. We try and keep the donation forms as simple as possible during the process. So, I mean, minimum is first name, last name, email address, and credit card info. That is the minimum to collect. You don't need an address. You just need a zip code. So you try and keep it as simple as possible if you're processing credit cards. If not, it can stay just as simple, just to take a pledge for a mail and a check and things like that. So you need a text auto reply service. You need a website to process the donations. After that, when somebody puts in their information, the website that processed the payments feeds the live stream the information. Okay, and then from that step, if there's a live auctioneer, okay, the live auctioneer can see it and call out the people. So that's the start to finish of a donation, from the first text to the thank you. Okay, during that process, there's the overlay frames, which you have seen throughout, and Ryan can speak to that because he's the one who makes the majority of them. So,
True.
If you want to speak to that, Ryan.
Yeah, well, actually, I want to just point out one more thing. So, what happens, Nick, when a client or an event planner? What happens when they already have a payment processing platform and they don't really want to change that?
Okay, so there's two options here. Some payment processing platforms can be integrated, so we can just say, hey, process this charge. If not, we can work as an intermediary. Somebody would come in, text the number, they'd go to the website, they'd put in their first name, last name, email address, donation amount, they press next. At that point, when they press next, it would go to the meter, okay? But they don't know that. So it's not going, it goes to the live stream at that point, and then the next button forwards to the payment processor for them to put in the rest of the information and get billed on a credit card. If it is mailing a check, donor advised funds, we don't have to worry about the payment processor. We just do it all on our end.
Right. Well, and that's, it's good to point out because typically anything that touches client accounts, there's a level of fuss over it, and rightly so. So ultimately, whereas, with again, another DIY solution, they may be a little more rigid in terms of what you can and can't do. But having a little bit more flexibility to that back end structure will work for a lot more people the way they want it to, as opposed to having to just shoehorn into, say, one way or another. But Nick, you mentioned the overlay frames. So in any event, and I'll kind of just back up a second just for the visual example. So here's an example. This kind of graphic around the image here is the overlay frames. And what we do is we have a storyboarding process with each client to go through the look and feel, not only of the event, but also what it's going to change and how it's going to look scene by scene. Now, many times my process for a client is always that this should look like the same event, right? And many times the video itself is going to outlive the event website, just for sake of not needing to host it for that long. Why pay to keep that going for infinity? We're just looking for just that event season, so to speak. This video should really reflect that theme. It should be the same event, and that's what we say over and over. And there's complete creative control at this point. We can have anything we want, more or less, in this broadcast, including these dynamic layers, including the names scrolling across, and the updating total. And maybe it's a little shout out, a name pops up and says, thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Nick. The meter, what I'll call is a fundraising visualization, right? We're visualizing our fundraising efforts. We're creating that momentum, and we're creating that, like, we're almost there. You're trying to get people to want to help us get to the next level. And that's something that, again, we talk about, like Give Smarts and One Cause. They have a level of that as well, which does integrate into live streams. It certainly does. But we may not have the amount of flexibility. We certainly don't have the flexibility that we'd have for more of a custom build out. And so in this case, what we'd have in this example here, we had a heart meter, but if I back up to another one, we have the event, but we don't have the meter per se. We had like a diploma that filled up with a color. We've had videos in the meter where it was like pool water filling up a meter. We can really get really creative with how the fundraising visualization works and looks. And ultimately, we're creating a seamless event experience, a memorable experience. Maybe we're working sponsor branding into it. There's always an opportunity to create sponsor branding. So that certainly is a key feature of this, is having that level of customization and branding and an emotional factor, the emotional experience side of things. Nick, we're coming down to the end of time here, so what I want to do is just jump ahead, because this what doesn't work sort of applies now as well as the virtual side, right? I'm sorry, as well as the hybrid side. So what I wanted to touch on really quickly on the hybrid thing, on the hybrid end, is that you're really talking about all of that, everything that we've just discussed in the last 56 minutes. We're talking about that and an in-person production. There's been a lot of conversation thus far as to, okay, well, we want to do hybrid, but we don't have more money. And while that's understandable, I mean, a lot of groups were hard up for funds throughout the pandemic. I mean, it's certainly understandable. It's just, it doesn't translate to the hybrid setting perfectly without looking at it as two separate productions. There are two sets of lead times. There are two sets of how long does this take to build. We show up that morning or the day before, many times that morning, to set up an in-person gala, whereas for a virtual presentation, we're working on it for a month ahead of time, at least. So it's not quite the same thing. So you have to look at it as you're scaling your budget in order to have both. We can certainly scale down in one side and scale down in another side, but I think what people find is that you end up with not great in both avenues, or maybe it's hey, just a single stream. I want you to feel like you can see too if you didn't want to come. And then we have some different ways that we would show and display those fundraising aspects. So, Nick, what you pointed out earlier is that we might even adjust the run of show to suit that. So maybe if it is just a stream and we're not asking everyone to kind of stick with us for the whole experience, because we're not able to duplicate the virtual the in-person experience. Maybe the in-person experience, we just don't have the budget at that point to add a second production, so we're just going to add a little bit more and stream it. Well, then you need to consider that your run of show is not going to be the same as it otherwise would have been. You have really just the program. If you break it up with dinner, you've lost all of your audience, because people aren't necessarily going to sit around for an hour and wait for you to get back at it. So you have to consider that you're structuring things a little bit different. We talk about networking. The networking we can create in the virtual setting, but it doesn't necessarily work unless there is a guided presence to it, unless you're there telling people. Again, we get back to it's like herding cats, right? Like, all right, you may be able to network people, but if you can't get them from one place of the event to the next, if you can't create that kind of seamless experience, or if you don't have the resources, the personnel to do it, then it's best not to do it and leave that for the in-person experience only. So again, just kind of thinking of it in two separate avenues, two separate levels of production. There are venue requirements with hybrid that really need to be taken into account. Like, do we have solid hard-lined internet connection? If they can't give us that limits drastically what we're able to do. If it's just Wi-Fi, then you really can't put a lot of faith into how that's going to go, because it is a non-stable connection at that point. It may be strong Wi-Fi, but it may not give us the level of stability that we need for a successful show. People aren't going to wait for the buffering to stop. That's going to create a poor quality of experience, is what we call it. So, and then on the actual content side, what works, what doesn't, and this applies to both hybrid and virtual. What we've seen is that paddle raises work incredibly well. Paddle raises where it's, I made a pledge, my name shows up in the broadcast, or the auctioneer in the room called you out and said, hey, John Smith made a donation. Oh, Nicholas McElhaney made a donation online. Like that, we can recreate. Whereas A live auction, do I have 500? Do I have 600? That does not work well. And that is something that we found time and time again. Are there ways to approach it specifically for an auction that maybe isn't in lockstep with the rest of your virtual event? Yes. But in the context of what we're describing here, we've been asked time and time again, can we do this virtual fundraiser? The answer is it's not going to work the way that you want it to. One of the reasons is latency, right? When we broadcast something, it may be 20 to 25 seconds before it's received by the audience. So if I'm on, I'm going once, going twice, the audience isn't going to see that for 20 seconds. So how are you going to generate any sort of excitement? It's going to create chaos. You also create, if it's a hybrid setting, you create an unfair advantage for people who are in the room because they're seeing it first. And then even if we're doing in a slightly different scenario where there is an in-person setting and a virtual audience, it's very challenging for a live auctioneer to keep their eye on both a digital audience and an in-person audience at the same time. So that's one thing we typically say, stay away from when it comes to virtual components. If it's just an in-room experience, like, hey, we're going to do the paddle raise and then bon voyage to the virtual audience, we're going to do an in-person auction. That could work quite well. So but again, just some things to think about. Nick, is there anything else that you wanted to add to this end before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times when we're dealing with clients, we have to reel them in a little bit. Okay. They are making their little tiny portions of their event, they're focusing on them too much and making it too difficult. Okay. And they don't put the focus towards their main event. So for example, like you said, a live auction, some people really focus on that, but in an in-person event, a live auction can go on 30, 45 minutes. When your whole show is 45 minutes to an hour, you can't do that.
Right.
So you have to kind of weigh in what's good for a virtual event and what isn't. And a lot of times things just don't work. Okay. Right. And, we've done a fair amount of networking things with nonprofits before their events, after their events. They don't work as well as the corporate ones. Right. The people there really aren't as happy to be there or really wanting to be there as the corporate ones. Right. They might want to see the select few people that they know, but they don't want to see everybody. Right. And then they're lost. And then if it's before, they already have a bad taste in their mouth because they didn't have a good experience. Things like that you have to keep in mind.
Yeah, well, the corporate networking obviously is much more result oriented. Like I'm trying to meet people for a specific reason because it's going to help me advance my career. Whereas the social networking is a little bit more, I want to see the people I want to see, just like you said, Nick. So, that's certainly, something to take into account. On the hybrid side, again, we have had a number of very successful experiences where we had an in-person audience, a virtual audience, an in-person presenter, and a virtual presenter. That is certainly doable. It's something that we're literally doing this right now. We have a stage in the next room, and we have an audience in the next room, and we have virtual audiences here. So it is all doable. Now, again, we're getting back to two productions, and test comes into play as well. Stable connection from the venue. I mean, all of these things really come into play. The complexity level goes up drastically. There's also a few other things that we can't really do. Like, even if we're broadcasting that custom meter with the overlays and the fundraising visualization, the meter, what have you. Even if we are broadcasting that out to the virtual audience, it is not advisable to broadcast that to the in-person audience unless it's a virtual presenter. If it's an and this, again, we're getting into nuanced detail, but I think that's kind of, the point of what I'm trying to illustrate is that there is a lot of nuanced detail to the hybrid setting, where if we have a camera image and we're adding the graphics and branding and all that, we're adding just enough latency that now what's happening on stage feels like it's early, or what's happening on screen is late at that point. So again, another reason, two separate productions. And if there's one thing that we take away, I think, from the hybrid conversation as we wrap up here, the hybrid fundraiser, just like the hybrid event in a very true sense, is very much so two different productions. And there are budgets that go along with that. And so rather than scale down and make two meh experiences, it might be better to prioritize budget on one and maybe gear up for next year to do it, a little bit differently. But we've heard a lot of conversations where, it's people being saying like, hey, I don't have this budget, but this is what I'm being told I need to produce. And so if we can arm you with those tools to say like, here's why, here's what has to happen, I think you end up being able to communicate that side a little bit better, so that you're getting less pressure to do things that just aren't necessarily possible in the budget parameters that we're being given. Again, it is two separate productions. So and on that, I guess we'll end the hybrid conversation. And Nick, we're 6 minutes over, so I think we're about done here. But I wanted to say thank you very much, not only for your time here and for the presentation, but also for being a tremendous partner for us over the years. We've really appreciated working with you, and and hope you've liked working with us too. What can I say?
You guys are okay. I mean, there's some guys on your team I like. There's some I don't. No, I'm only kidding. Everybody at Corporate AV is fantastic. So I'm happy to be here. I had a good time doing this. You and I thought we weren't going to be able to talk for an hour. I said we're going to do it no matter what.
I can't count myself out with talking too much,
So this was great.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess end this for us. However your outro is.
Oh no, I'm not going to tell you. That's it. I'm only kidding. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate you being here again. All these sessions are being recorded, so come check back later on, or share this with a friend or what have you. In case you were you missed it, or somebody else who'd be interested in hearing it. If there's anything else you'd like to hear about, please comment in the comments section. Go on to the the event side. Join us for let's see, it's 3:00. I think. What are we networking now? 3:00 is networking. So on the left-hand side, you click that networking button, and that's going to bring you to another location, and it's going to say, are you ready? And you're going to say yes, and you're going to go in, and you're going to meet some people. So hopefully, you stick around, you get to do that, and then, come back and join us at 3:30 for another main stage session. So thank you all. Thank you, Nick. And we'll see you all soon.